you called me an erratic... No, you called me. You didn't call me anything.
Yourself?
I called myself an erratic Marxist. You're absolutely right. You mentioned my reference to myself as an erratic Marxist, but I also refer to myself as a libertarian Marxist in order to confuse my enemies even more. But not just that, but because I do believe in it. But let me explain that just for a second. Liberal individualism, which is the political philosophy underpinning the British establishment, the Western European establishment, and the American liberal democratic regimes that we've been having now for more than a century. Liberal individualism turns on a strict separation between the individual and the collective. The whole point about seeking legitimacy in the individual has to do with the presupposition that the individual is well defined outside the collective. You are a sovereign agent, you're a sovereign consumer in the marketplace, you are a well-defined entity with well-defined preferences, desires, beliefs, and your liberty is conceptualized in terms of how well protected you are from the collectivity, from the riffraff, from the state, from the taxman, from the police, from the secret police. Now, that is a very useful way of understanding the individual, but I think that it is very narrow. The ancient Athenians, who had a very different idea about the good life and the democratic polity, they would never have understood that. So Socrates and Plato and Aristotle, even though they had many differences between them, would never have understood the, if you want, the Scottish Enlightenment tradition of David Hume and Adam Smith that defines the individual as well-rounded and well-defined, independently of the demos, independently of the polis, of the city, independently of the community. The ancient Athenians thought that the only way you can understand yourself is by catching your own reflection in the eyes of the other, of the person that you are discussing with. That without the other, without the polis, without the demos, you're a savage. You would never have any idea of what you want and who you are. So this is an interesting juxtaposition. So the point I want to make is that there is something profoundly wrong, profoundly misleading about a society that cherishes individual autonomy and individual freedom by juxtaposing it against the collective. And if you want, now I'll speak as an economist, just for a very, very, very short space of time, I promise. Take the market and the state. We live in a society, don't we, that takes it for granted that there is something like the state, which is defined as the absence of markets, and something like the market, which is defined as the free flow of demand and supply, as Adam Smith would have said, independently of the state. And yet, this is not the world we live in. The world we live in is one in which there is a great intertwining between markets and states. There would be no marketplace, there would be no market society in Britain if we didn't have the enclosures. And we would never have had the enclosures if there was no state to ensure that the peasants, the riffraff, were expelled from the lands. The two were always symbiotic, especially today. The European Union was created as a great cartel. The first name for the European Union was the European Communities of Coal and Steel. It was a cartel to make sure there would be no competition between the producers of steel from Belgium, from Germany, from Italy, from France. The whole point of the European Union was to stop market forces from pushing prices down. Yeah? Now, a parsimonious Scot or an Adam Smith, laissez-faire, free market capitalist or liberal will say, this is why we're getting out of the EU. because they created it as a great cartel. Yes, but what is going on in this country? What's going on in the United States? Do you think we live in a realm of competitive markets? No, we don't. We live in a world where most prices are fixed, and they are fixed by collusion between planning systems. If you ever go into the Google campus in California, what you are going to encounter is a small, very efficient, and quite pretty Soviet Union. There are no markets in there. What there is a strictly hierarchical company that has created a whole space where people actually live, breathe, exercise, do yoga, create products. There is no market. Nobody pays for anything. You go in there, you eat, you drink. And it's a whole community, self-contained community. Goldman Sachs. Is there a market in Goldman Sachs? No. It operates like the Politburo, the Central Committee, and the KGB. Anybody who's worked for Goldman Sachs will confirm that. They are proud of it in the same way Vladimir Putin is proud of the FSB and the KGB. But there is no market space there. There is no liberal individualism in ExxonMobil or in, General Motors, yeah? Or in Facebook, for that matter. We live in a world which has presented itself as liberal democratic, failing to conceptualize the fact that liberalism and democracy have traditionally been foes, and would like to think of itself as a market society when our societies have markets. But in the end, we live in a series of planning systems that are clashing and cooperating with one another. Systems that are utterly financialized. Did anybody come here to Edinburgh by train? Did you book online? Did somebody book online? Yeah, you paid 75p for that. That went to Trainline, right? Which is owned by another 5 shell companies. Your 75p traveled at approximately 22 times between London and the Isle of Man and Jersey, and then Luxembourg, before ending up with a company called KKR in the United States, where it merged into financial flows of similar tiny little payments and larger payments in a technostructure that has nothing to do with the marketplace, which no state controls, and yet which is aided and abetted by state legislation that your members of parliament vote for without realizing that they're doing it. So what kind of space is there for democracy in this kind of technostructure? A technostructure that has 4 manufacturing processes happening at once. One is a process that manufactures prices. I remember reading a book by John Kenneth Galbraith, the great American liberal economist, who, during the war, was given the job by Franklin Roosevelt to fix prices during the war economy. Prices were fixed during the war in Britain, in the United States. And he says somewhere in his memoirs, he says, it was fascinating to realize how easy it is to fix prices when they are already fixed between the conglomerates. So, manufacturing prices, manufacturing desires. We all love to think that we buy that which we love and we love that which we buy. But this is not, strictly speaking, true, even if it is. Because there is a process of manufacturing our desires. It's called marketing. It's the paraphernalia of processes that instruct us as to what we actually like, even before we like it. Thirdly, a process that manufactures money. If you knew how money was created by the banks, you would be up in arms. The fact is that money is conjured up from thin air. It is not true that when you get a mortgage, the banker is using savings of other people to give it to you. What happens is the banker is actually typing into your bank account a certain amount of money, and it's a black magic of finance. 97% of pounds and pence in this country were created by private finance. When in 2008 this whole technostructure came down, you know that the bankers around Europe, the United Kingdom, and the United States effectively found themselves owing to one another and to others 50 times the gross national product of the West. Okay? So there's a lot of manufacturing going on. Prices, desires, money, and of course, consent. And that's how we come to the world of the media and to the world of fashioning a certain set of ideas that the KGB during the Soviet Union, those of who are still alive, like Putin, must be really kicking themselves. Because those former KGB agents who had tortured people, who had sent people to the Gulag, are now looking at the West thinking, my goodness, we didn't have to do any of that. We could manufacture consent in ways that were a lot more anodyne, a lot more humanistic, without any violence. This technostructure came tumbling down in 2008 under the weight of its own hubris. The world we live in today cannot be made sense of in terms that were conventional wisdom before 2008. That has only happened once before, in 1929. After the crash of 1929, the world did no longer made sense. After 1929, by means of the conventional wisdom of the 1920s. Similar to today, the crisis of 2008 is still with us. Greece is an example of a place that was completely crushed through a combination of the inanity of its own ruling class, our own ruling class, and the faulty design of the European monetary architecture. But Greece is simply the canary in the mine. It should really not matter in Scotland, it should not matter in the United States, it should not matter anywhere. The only reason why we're discussing it is because we have not fixed capitalism after 2008, because capitalism cannot be fixed, at least not to go back to where it was before 2008. So allow me to finish with a dream. If I am right, and this is something we're going to discuss, that 2008 was our generation's 1927, then today we live in our generation's postmodern 1930s. Just look around you. We have a nationalist, neo-fascist international that is rising up everywhere. It is led by Donald Trump in the United States of America. In Europe, he has very able handmaidens in Matteo Salvini, the Deputy Prime Minister in Italy. We have an interior and police minister in Austria, of all places in Austria, that comes from a party that was founded as a fascist party. We have Orban in Hungary. We have the Polish illiberal democratic regime, whatever that means. We have a France that is celebrating the fact that the fascists only got 36% of the vote in the last presidential election, only 36%. We have Britain that is caught up in a polarizing debate going nowhere about Brexit and preventing us from having a sensible, liberal discussion regarding the interests of the peoples of this nation, of this country. So the dream is that we have a New Deal like that which Franklin Roosevelt introduced in 1933, but at a global scale, an internationalist New Deal involving progressive movements in this country, in the United States, in Mexico, with the new president that they have now elected, in continental Europe. This is why our movement, DiEM25, will be running in the European Parliament elections in order to introduce what we call a New Deal for Europe, is our agenda for what to do with the four crises that are tearing our societies apart. Private debt, public debt, poverty, and incredibly low levels of investment in the things that humanity needs and the planet needs. So my dream would be that we have a progressive international opposing simultaneously the inane establishment that is reminding me increasingly of the Weimar Republic as it was crumbling in the late 1920s, and the nationalist neo-fascist international. I thought we should end with a dream.